Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Northern Kentucky History Hour. I'm your host, Heather Cook. Northern Kentucky History Hour is a project of the Behringer-Crawford Museum, Northern Kentucky's History Museum. The Behringer-Crawford Museum is supported in part by the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, Arts Wave, Kentucky Arts Council, Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, the Carol Ann and Ralph V. Hale Jr. U.S. Bank Foundation, and our members. If you're not currently a member of the museum, please consider joining us for access to discounts and exclusive programming. You can find out more about joining at bcmuseum.org. I highly recommend it. We have so many programs at the museum. You all love it. It's a great place to be and a great community to join. Before we begin, we can go over a few reminders. Everyone's microphone has been muted so that we can all focus on the presentation. You can feel free to turn off your video or on, depending on your preference. But if your video is on, others on the call will be able to see you even when the screen is being shared. If you have a question or comment, please put it in the chat, and then we will try to get to as many questions immediately following the presentation as possible tonight. We also will have a trivia question. The first person to put the correct answer in the chat will win a Northern Kentucky History Hour pin. So let's meet tonight's speaker. Born in New Jersey and raised in Kentucky, Goss has spent the majority of his life in the music industry. Before joining the Boone County Distilling family, he was a radio host for 96 Rock Cincinnati. With his love of history and taste for fine bourbons, he has found himself embracing both of those passions in his current position. Jason, welcome. With Jason, we also have Jeff Moffitt from the Boone County Distillery as well, and he will be taking us around the distillery as Jason presents tonight. So welcome, and you can start your presentations.
Alrighty. All right, guys. How you doing? My name is Jason Goss, of course, with Boone County Distillery. Now, we're going to start out with a lot of history. It is the Northern Kentucky History Hour, and the story about the original Boone County Distillery actually is some of the foundations of Kentucky being a state and Boone County being a county itself. So the story actually starts shortly after the conclusion of the Revolutionary War. Now, in 1785, there was a gentleman by the name of Reverend John Tanner who actually he was given 40 acres of land. He paid a company in Pennsylvania to clear out a plot of land in Boone County by the river. Now, before then, Kentucky was still a frontier. There was still only the 13 colonies. There was something called the Westward Expansion that was just in its infancy at that time. I really didn't pick up steam itself until about 1801, but it really started here in Boone County. So in 1785, John Tanner was given his 40-acre plot. It was right by the river in the town that we now call Petersburg, Kentucky. He named it Tanner Station. Of course, very creative. He just used his last name and station. Now, if you're familiar with that area of Boone County, you might be familiar with Tanner's Creek, Tanner's Road. There's actually a couple of churches in the area that were actually founded by the Tanner family. Of course, he was a reverend, so a lot of that bled through their family and into the community at the foundations of it. So after he got his plot of land, unfortunately, the land that they gave Mr. Tanner was all on ancient Native American burial ground. Now, generally, we all know, if you've seen the movies and the stories, you know how this goes. It's not going to go well. So the things that ended up happening afterwards didn't really happen directly to John Tanner, but it did affect his sons. So first off, John Tanner had a 9-year-old son that ended up being kidnapped by one of the 4 ancient tribes. So they kidnapped this boy and they took him away for 24 years. Now, the way this story goes, it's kind of crazy, a little bit morbid if you're sensitive to, such things that are graphic. I don't know, you might want to plug your ears, but John Tanner, his son, was taken away at 9 years old, and he actually comes back after 24 years of being kidnapped. Now, when he returns, he decided he wanted to get married, build a home, live the dream that, he was brought up with envisioning. So he does all those things. And then he leaves. Everybody kind of assumed that he took his wife with him. Maybe it was a honeymoon. They were going on some type of trip. Not the case. Matter of fact, he ended up putting a hatchet in the side of her head and burying her under the house. Now, nobody really knew what happened. He left. He never came back. Now, when they excavated the site the home was on, about 100 years later, they actually found the remains of his former wife with a very obvious hatchet wound in the side of the head. Now, as kind of a joke, we call that a traditional divorce in Boone County. Although I don't think it's happened lately, and it might not have happened since then. But like I said, it's just a joke. Don't get any ideas. Just because you live in Boone County, don't do it. Try to keep it civil. If you take anything from this presentation, love each other. Now, another one of Tanner's sons at 12 years old is actually torn apart by wild boar. He was out foraging for nuts and berries, and actually they got to him and they found that boy dead in the field. Now, this didn't stop there with that son. And John Tanner's two oldest sons, George and Ezra, they were 17, 16 years old respectively. They were leading a hunting trip with a few other guys from the settlement. And they were actually down, it was actually a place called Split Rock. So it's a little bit south of Petersburg, and it's a little bit north of, say, Big Bone State Park and Rabbit Hash. So it's kind of caught in the middle of those two places. Now they're out hunting, enjoying themselves, hopefully bring home some food. That's the ultimate goal. But it turns out they encounter a tribe that was also hunting. Now, at that time, with some of the European settlers still being new to some of the tribes out west that haven't encountered them yet, of course, that was their territory. So fighting started. Now, 3 of the hunting party were actually killed pretty quickly. Ezra Tanner, the oldest son, and a gentleman named Alan Hinman actually take cover. Now, reinforcements end up arriving, but not for them, actually for the tribe itself. So they were even more outnumbered as previous. Now, the oldest son, Ezra, he just watched his brother get killed right in front of him, a couple of his friends. Now, he felt compelled to come up with some type of solution to get the rest of them out of the situation. Now, when he actually saw the chief come in with the reinforcements, he thought this was his chance to do something. Now, he asked the chief, he proposed an idea. He was going to basically challenge him to a duel with tomahawks. And the agreement being, if Ezra Tanner wins, he'll let the rest of the surviving party be able to take their dead back to the settlement, be done with the situation. So the chief agrees. Of course, the chief has been pretty successful at killing people for the previous 3 decades. So he didn't think the 17-year-old kid coming up to it was going to be a big deal. Now, it turns out about an hour into the duel, Ezra kind of wears the chief out, lands a shot in the side of his head, and kills him. So in return, the tribes people were, a little bit of emotional situation to see their chief get killed in front of them. So they went ahead and finished off everybody else in the Tanner's hunting party, except for one guy. His name was Alan Hinman. Now, they let him survive enough. Basically, they beat him and they half scalped him, but they let him go back to the settlement, which was about a 3-mile walk, which is pretty impressive for this guy that's in real bad shape, to basically tell everybody at the settlement what happened. And ultimately, within about a week, he succumbed to his wounds and also died. So I know the start of this isn't exactly a very pretty picture. It's not a very, pretty story, but it does have everything to do with the founding of the county. Now, Tanner lived there. Now, in 1833, that was when there was kind of a big transition from the early 1800s up to 1833, when Tanner Station eventually became Petersburg, Kentucky, or what they would call Old Pete back then. So there was a gentleman by the name of William Snyder from Virginia. He goes to Petersburg and he's looking for a way to expand, get into some type of industry. He ends up buying a flour mill. Now, his idea is, I'm not going to just make flour. So he started out just making flour. While that was happening, he converted his complex into a distillery, because way back in the day, a lot of the folks that were millers, people that milled grain, a gallon of whiskey lasts a lot longer than a pound of flour. And plus you could sell it for more. So a lot of these guys, when their grains were rotting And basically it would be, they would have to absorb the cost and get rid of the stuff. They would actually use it, cook it, ferment it, turn it into whiskey. So that was the way a lot of these folks, like if you look at, say, Miller Brewing Company, there's a reason why that last name comes back from centuries ago, the Millers, people that milled grain. And eventually they started, one of the tribes of the family started making beer. So that was a way for them to kind of extend their product and ultimately make more money. So Mr. Snyder starts making bourbon. Turns out the guy's really good at it. By 1860, that old Petersburg Distillery was already producing 1 million gallons a year, which is really impressive by standards back then. Even by today's standards, I mean, some of the biggest distilleries in the world are making maybe 5 million gallons of whiskey a day. This day with modern technology, if you take it all the way back to the 1850s, 1860s, that's really impressive. That's a lot of sweat, blood, and tears come out of a lot of individuals. So 1860 million gallons a year, things are rolling around quite nice. Now, unfortunately, that's about the time where the Civil War in this country starts. Now, because of the war effort, taxes skyrocket, especially on alcohol. Now, Mr. Snyder, there's a couple different stories about why he didn't pay his taxes, whether or not he just carte blanche said, you know what, I'm not going to, this absorbent tax, I'm not going to pay it. Either way, Mr. Snyder fell back quite a bit on his taxes. So inevitably, the government shows up and confiscates the distillery, takes everything connected to that distillery from Mr. William Snyder. So he kind of takes it. He made his money. He left. He actually ended up moving to Tennessee. Now, his son-in-law was Colonel William Appleton, who was a pretty well-known officer in the Army at the time, the Union Army. And he was also rich, which helps with a lot of things. So he ended up buying the distillery when it went up for auction on the courthouse steps in Boone County. So William Appleton takes control of the distillery. He introduced a couple of investors. Now, one of those investors was very important. His name was Levi Werkham. So we nicknamed him the industrialist. He had some of his own steamboats. He was really good at taking something small that was good and turning it into something that's produced on a massive industrial scale. So Levi Werkham enters the equation. Now, he was so good at what he did, by the 1890s, he was putting out 4 million gallons a year by 1897, which is on par with some of the biggest distilleries in the world from way back then. Even to this day, some of the biggest distilleries, like I said, are producing between 4 and 5 million gallons of whiskey a year. So back then, I mean, a lot of people that have lived in this county for a long time don't even realize how much of an impact that distillery had on the founding of the county and actually the state itself. So, of course, the 1890s, they're putting out 4 million gallons of whiskey. Now, to get to the point to where the end of that distillery comes into, the distillery gets shuttered by 1910. Now, the process of that happening had to do with a group called the Whiskey Trust. Now, if you're not familiar with that group, back in the 1890s, they were a band of distillers that was kind of a front for a lot of shadowy money. It was outside of Chicago. The mob was involved. Certain elements of the robber barons and people that were in the government at the time were basically trying to consolidate the whiskey industry by force so they could control it before Prohibition. So what this Whiskey Trust would do is they would actually come to your distillery once you got on their radar, once they knew you were producing such an amount, usually a large amount, and they would peek around. They would give you an offer that was usually really, really low, way below market. Now, if you had an issue with that offer, they would basically threaten you with destruction. So they would tell you, listen, if you don't take the offer, we got a carriage full of dynamite that we brought with us. We've done this before. We'll throw a few sticks of dynamite in your rick house and we're going to blow it up. And nobody's going to do anything about it. There's nobody you can tell. There's no help you can send that's going to help you for this. So inevitably, by 1899, the distillery ends up being sold to the Whiskey Trust. Now, because the place was so profitable at the time, they actually ran the distillery until 1910. At which point, in effort to consolidate, they tore everything down. They actually sold all the equipment and they sold each individual brick that the campus and distillery was built on. Now, that distillery itself wasn't just a distillery and a couple of rick houses. They had their own cooperage. They had people that lived there. There were homes that were nearby. It was a massive campus. It was a massive complex. So a lot of those bricks were repurposed to build downtown Petersburg. Now, if you go to Petersburg now, granted, there really isn't a whole lot going on. There's not even really a stoplight, but that's not why it's important. There's a lot of heritage still in that area. So if you go to where the original distillery stood, it's right on the river. There's actually a big historical marker there. And it's just a big field now. That's all that's out there. Now, there was a home that still exists now. It's actually owned by a private individual, and the house was built in the 1850s. Now, the folks that just sold it, they just sold it a few months ago, and the previous owners put a lot of work into it. It was kept up pretty well over the years, and it's still there. And there's actually a historical marker next to that home as well. So if you want to go check that out, it's really cool because the house is 170 years old. Just to be around that, you kind of get a vibe of the history and everything that happened back then just by being there. It's pretty cool. And the guy who owned the tavern, or owned the house, it was actually his home. It was also a bar on the first floor. That same guy was the coroner in Petersburg. He was the justice of the peace in the town. He was also the bookkeeper for the distillery. And like I said, he owned that bar. Now, that bar was right across the street from that original distillery. And they had a lot of people that would come in. Now, the employees of the month at the distillery would actually get an award from that bar. They would actually take their little certificate that they won Employee of the Month. They would go across the street, go to the bar after their shift, and they would get a hand-churned scoop of ice cream with a shot of bourbon on top of it, which was pretty special to get back then. Ice cream itself back then was a delicacy. You couldn't just go buy it somewhere. Of course, you had refrigeration and freezing issues, but to get it, it had to be made fresh and made right in front of you. So that was the big deal of itself. Now, if you put bourbon on it, even bigger of a deal. I mean, we still like to enjoy doing that now. And there's actually a product that we have at the distillery that is inspired off of that story, off of that gentleman's dessert recipe, that bourbon covered ice cream. It's our bourbon cream. Not to, go into a sales pitch or anything, but if you're not really keen on trying straight bourbon, if it's something you can eventually get into, try the bourbon cream, trust me. If you put it in your coffee in the morning, it'll make the day go by much better, I promise. And it also tastes really good. So keep that in mind. Now, the reason why we know a lot of in-depth detail about what happened back then, thank you, Jeff, perfect, is that that same guy, Lewis Loder is his name. The name of the home is the Loder House. He kept a diary for 50 years on top of everything else he did. He was a busy guy, had his hands on a lot of things. So he was a bookkeeper at the distillery. He ran that bar, coroner, justice of the peace. He kept a diary as well. So that diary is actually the original leather-bound diary itself is at the Burlington branch of the Boone County Library. I think it's over there off 18 on Taylor Drive. Now, we have a copy of it. When I tell you it's thick, it's thick. It's probably about that thick. So everything in minute detail between Mr. Loder, he would write down how much he had to go to Covington to pay in taxes for the distillery, which even back then it was a lot. I think the last one I saw from his last entry was about $17,000 in the 1880s, 1890s. I think it's right around there. So they were getting their cut back then too, that's for sure. But yeah, so Mr. Loder kept a diary for 50 years, probably about 4 entries a day. And that's how we get a lot of that detailed history from way back in the day. Now, another thing that has to do, of course, the state was built on bourbon. More specifically, Boone County was built on bourbon. Now, some of the history of Kentucky, because there's a lot of stuff that people talk about, what does it have to be considered bourbon? Does it have to be made in a very specific place to be bourbon? A lot of people think it has to be Kentucky, or even as far as it has to be Bourbon County, Kentucky. Now, that whole part of Kentucky used to be Virginia, and they called it Old Bourbon because it was just that area of the country. So there's a few stories that are out there of why that whiskey is called bourbon. Now, first of all, for it to be bourbon, it has to be 5 to 6 very specific things. It has to be made in America. It doesn't have to be Kentucky. Now, 95% of bourbon is still made in Kentucky, And there's actually some science behind why that is. Our water in the state. Now, they figured this out back in the 1800s, early 1800s, when they started cranking out bourbon in Kentucky, because a lot of that came from the Irish and a lot of folks that were cutting up from Great Britain that wanted to make whiskey when they were here, which eventually will become bourbon. So bourbon has to be made in America. It has to be 51% corn. That's what the mash bill has to contain. It also has to be aged in a new charred oak container. They never specified what type of container, and they never specified what type of oak. So it could be French oak. It would be, white American oak, which is what we use, which is probably one of the more common oaks used in the industry. And also Kentucky is full of oak trees. So that works out pretty well. Now, also Kentucky, the water is Kentucky's on limestone. So limestone filters out iron. Iron is going to ruin your distillate right off the bat. So before that product even makes it in the barrel, it will be bad. It will give it kind of like a rusty nail taste, which really isn't a taste that anybody's aiming for if you're making bourbon. And it's also, limestone gets out, well, it also infuses calcium, magnesium, so it's hard water. So that's what you want for making bourbon. Now, the other part about Kentucky being a bonus for making bourbon is it is the climate for aging purposes. So Kentucky is known for climate or temperature fluctuations. If you've been here long enough, you know what I'm talking about. So we got hot summers, we got cold winters. You can have a day in March that's 70 degrees. You can have a day in March that's 25 degrees. So the temperature is always shifting. Now, why that is important is that the wood in the barrels that the whiskey is aging in is constantly expanding and contracting. So it's also pulling and pushing the liquid in and out of the oak. So you're drawing all the sugars out of the oak. Now, a lot of times it comes out the other end of the barrel, unfortunately, but that's just kind of how it goes. So say, for instance, if you were to get whiskey down in Texas, if you've ever seen Texas whiskey, it's typically lighter in color. Now, the reason why is they're not getting all those temperature fluctuations aside from last winter. So they may have some good whiskey that comes out soon. I'm not sure. Not saying it's bad. It's just, it's different. You're not getting as much out of the oak. So climate is definitely a big part of that. Now, another legal standard for bourbon, I did mention 51% corn, made in America. When it's distilled, it can't come off the still any higher than 160 proof. Now, the reason why that was determined is if you get past 160 proof, which is 80% alcohol by volume, you're losing all the flavor of the grain that spirit was distilled from. So you're basically, if you get past 160 proof, you're making vodka, or what we call a grain neutral spirit. So you're taking away all the flavor of the grain. Now, when they make vodka, basically it comes off the still at about 190 proof. And when they sell it, they'll put water in it, proof it down to 80, 85, 90 proof. Then they'll bottle it and then they'll sell it. So when you're drinking vodka, you're not really tasting the grain, you're tasting the alcohol. So in bourbon, we want to preserve the flavor because bourbon really is all about flavor. That's the main focus on it. The buzz is definitely a fringe benefit, but it's all about flavor. Now, once you take it off the still under 160 proof, it can't go into a barrel any higher than 125 proof. Now, the reason why is once you get past that, you're going to start drawing things out of the oak wood that you don't want. Bitterness, acidity, harshness, what's called tannins that come out of the oak. It's going to ruin the flavor. So you don't want to draw those things out of the oak. So you want to keep it under 125 proof, and you have to. Now, like I said, it does have to be aged in a new charred oak container, and then it has to follow the basic rules of any spirit. It has to be at least 80 proof. Now, there was an act called the Bobbin Bond Act that came out over 100 years ago. Now, the reason why that came about is when you were getting into Prohibition and right before Prohibition, there were no standards. There wasn't inspectors coming and checking the batches. And there were people cutting the bourbon with caustic things, poisonous things. And actually, a lot of people died because of that. So the government instituted the Bobbin Bond Act. So, of course, very integral in Kentucky history because like 95% of bourbon is made in Kentucky. And back then, it was all made in Kentucky. So, the Bobbin Bond Act, you has to be at least 100 proof, and it has to be under government supervision. So somebody's watching the batch being made, watching it get barreled, and watching it be taken out of the barrel, because people were cutting it with poisonous things to either get the color or increase the alcohol content. Not good. A lot of bad things happen. So they introduced the Bobbin Bond Act, and then it has to be distilled in the same season and bottled in that same season, and it has to be at least 4 years old, which is general for bourbon. If it's under 4 years old, you have to put an age statement on it saying how young it actually is. So those are some of the overages about, some of the legal things with bourbon, some of the things that happened in the past, like the Bobbin Bond Act, that, a lot of people were injured. It's a really huge part of American history back then. If you're familiar with the history of the country tied with bourbon and just spirits in general, I mean, this county itself in Grant County was built on bourbon and tobacco. And a matter of fact, if you go to I don't know if it still would be the case, but I had a buddy that went to the Grant County courthouse. It was probably like 6 or 7 years ago. And back when you could still smoke a cigarette in the courthouse. And when people would say, well, why is that? They would say, well, honey, this county was built on tobacco. So there was also a connection between guys who were making whiskey, making bourbon, and farming tobacco, because that was a very common thing in Kentucky. Virginia, Kentucky, North Carolina, perfect soil, perfect conditions to make really good tobacco. And that had to do a lot with Prohibition. So Prohibition, and actually the Boone County Distillery, the original, shuttered before Prohibition even started. So they got us out of the way really quick, because we were the biggest by volume producer in the state, in the country at one point in time. Now, when that happened, let me rewind real quick. So Prohibition comes into play. And actually, right before that started in the early 20s, the Boone County Distillery still had whiskey. The place closed in 1910, and they had enough whiskey to sell after that, after they stopped producing until 1919. So they had about 41,000 barrels left over from way back in the day. So yeah, and then, a lot of people say Newport. I know it's not Boone County, but it's Northern Kentucky history, but Newport was the original Las Vegas. You were cranking out a lot of booze in Kentucky. You had a lot of the mob that was in Chicago, in southern Wisconsin would come to Newport. So that was a huge part of the area as well, because all that happened on the Ohio River. And, there's quotes at one point in time in the 1800s to where they had dreams of Cincinnati being the Paris of America, because they were putting a lot of architecture into it. You had a lot of money that was coming in from the bourbon producers in Kentucky that would make it to Cincinnati, because that was kind of a major metropolitan area that's right across the river. So a lot of that money would funnel up there. A lot of the bourbon would make its way down the Ohio River. It was really easy to just throw it on a steamboat and send it down the river. But yeah, and to get back to the core of this whole presentation, is that all that stuff that became the bourbon industry now started here. It started in Boone County, right on the river. So we say, and it's kind of our tagline for our company, is made by ghosts. Now, a lot of people take that as the Distillery Haunted. Our distillery is not haunted. Now, if you go back to where the original place was, and the Split Rock, back where the Tanner's sons were, two of the Tanner sons were killed in battle, might be haunted. And that's kind of out around Big Bone Park, but the distillery's not. But the ghosts pertain to the original founders and the original workers from that original Boone County Distillery, because there's a lot of folks that live here still to this day that their ancestors worked at that distillery back in the 1800s, and they still live around here, and they're still part of the salt of the earth in this part of the country. I don't know if you guys are friends with any Hensleys, but I'm friends with a lot of Hensleys, and there were a lot of Hensleys that work at that Boone County Distillery way back in the day. Now, if you actually go to our website, boonedistilling.com, there is on the drop-down menu or the sidebar, if you're on PC, there is a link called Our Heritage that kind of gives you a visual of some of the overview of kind of the timeline history. And then there is a button called Trade. on that one, there are a few videos. Actually, one of the videos that's on there takes you to the Loder house that I was talking about earlier, that gentleman, Lewis Loder, that kept the diary and did pretty much everything in Petersburg, where that house actually still stands. So if you're a history nerd and you live in this part of the state, which I am a history nerd, and I do live here, you really, I mean, the center of a lot of American history after really before the Constitution was even ratified, happened here, because you had, from New Jersey down to Virginia and the Carolina, and then there was us here in Kentucky that came about right after that. And then, that spawned from there. And then you have all these distilleries in the state of Kentucky that it's a huge, it's the main part of our tourism industry here. Even just me being at the distillery, there are people from all over the world that come just to tour the distilleries in Kentucky. So if you are a Kentuckian at heart, which I've been in Kentucky for 22 years of my life, but actually I was originally, if you remember the bio earlier, born in New Jersey, but I've spent the majority of my life, the vast majority of my life here in Kentucky. And it's kind of an interesting connection for me specifically because I have a grandfather who actually, he passed before I was born, that was from Virginia, right basically on the border of Kentucky. And they were, of course, they were bootleggers. So it's kind of funny that I ended up in the industry legally this time, definitely legally. But yeah, no, it's very cool. And if you ever get a chance to check that diary out, go to the Burlington branch of the Boone County Library. They have the diary there. Whether or not they'll take it out and let you flip through it, I'm not sure, but I know they have a copy of it, and they might have an actual PDF of that diary on the Boone County Library website. Last time I checked was a while ago, so I'm not sure if it's still up there or not. But yeah, now if you guys wanted to, I'm not sure how many people are in here right now. I like to leave some time open for questions, so people can, if they had anything I wanted to go into more detail with, I can. Actually, that's perfect. You guys see the background here. That is the timeline overview of some of the key aspects of things that happen. And actually, now that you bring that timeline up, Jeff, that's perfect. There's a story I did not mention about a black bear. So Mr. Snyder, the original founder, had a lot of money, a couple decades into running that distillery. And they also partied really hard back then. It's even impressive by today's standards. So a lot of it's mentioned in the diary. At one point, they started their own horse park, to where they would, some of the guys, some of the owners, the higher ups had their own horses. Mostly guys were just drinking and betting on horses. And of course, that would get out of hand. Guys would lose and fight each other, and the horses would get loose. And they shut that place down very quickly. It was kind of agreed upon with the townspeople that it had to go. Now, the bear itself, in I believe it was 1856, 1857, Mr. Snyder got a bear. Now, it wasn't a bear that you bought off somebody that trained bears to be helpful around the home or be like a dog. It was a bear they found in the woods and brought it home. Didn't go over well with the townspeople. Now, that bear would get out of the cage he was in, which they called his box, all the time, every day. Wasn't a very secure box. Now, the gentleman that was in charge of the bear, his name was Perry Mcneilly. Now, he was also, his main thing was he planned a lot of the really swanky, fun parties in town in Petersburg with the distillery, connected with some of the more, prominent individuals in the area, but he was also in charge of the bear. He was a pretty big dude. He was stout. He was strong. Obviously had a good relationship with the bear, so that's a positive. So when the bear got out of his cage, he would have to go get the bear, put a chain on him, take it back to his cage, which he only had to do pretty much every day. Now, the neighbors to the Snyders were the Snelling family. Now, the Snellings were pretty patient. Whenever the bear got out, they would go to the Snelling's family's house first. And generally, he would either knock the fence over or jump the fence, move their stuff, eat some of their food, innocent bear things. Now, one day, and actually I think it was August of 1857, somewhere around there, late summer, the bear bit a girl in town. 7-year-old girl, didn't really go over well with the townspeople. So they told Mr. Snyder, they said, listen, we don't care if you're the king of industry in this area. If the bear does anything like that again, you got to go, or the bear's got to go. So actually, shortly after that happened, the bear ends up getting in trouble again. So by demands of the town folk, Mr. Snyder had to put his bear down, which was unfortunate, and actually happened to land on Christmas Eve, 1857, which is kind of a bummer for the holidays. So we here at the distillery memorialize the bear, and if you ever come by, you can meet him. We actually, nothing to be afraid of. He's bolted and screwed into the ground, so you don't have to worry about it. So you guys can come on by and check out the bear. Other than that, if you guys have any questions, shoot.
Yeah, we have not had any questions in the chat yet.
Okay.
But we do have a comment from Martha Watson. She said you can download a 238-page copy of the Loder Diary from the Boone County Public Library. Online.
Yeah, and I highly suggest anybody in this chat or in this Zoom meeting to check that diary out. Absolutely.
Also, I don't know how people's Zooms are set up right now. So if Jeff wants to go back to the timeline, I think.
Oh, I see a comment there.
Is Tanner's Lane in Florence named after John Tanner?
Yes, and that's actually a great question, because there is a church on Hopeful Church Road at the corner of Caton Road and Hopeful Church that was actually founded by the Tanner family.
How did you get your start in the industry?
It kind of just happened by fate, really. I was in radio, and once the pandemic started and the lockdowns happened, probably about 10,000 of us were let go. We were laid off as part of the industry. So I ended up finding a job posting at the Boone County Distillery. I had an interview, and I ended up in it. So yeah, good hearing from you, Randy. This is perfect. This is actually a tour that's happening right now. Ed Jenner. So Ed is perfect to be watching right now. Thank you, Jeff.
Somebody asked to mute him, but I don't think he'll show up on the screen if we mute it. I think because it's set up by who's speaking. So.
The chart, you actually lay it on.
Yeah, Ed is really loud. See, Randy knows it. So, how you doing, Randy? Good to hear from you, man.
We can also.
That's just somewhere. Yep.
We can also go over the trivia question
Sure.
real quickly. It was, what is the name of the man who started the first Euro-American settlement in Kentucky? The answer was Reverend John Tanner. Like you said, it was in pretty much the beginning of the presentation. Yep. We did have a winner. That was Sage Barr. He was the first to answer in the chat. So congratulations to Sage. You will be getting your prize in the mail shortly. The next history hour in the question, it will be on January 12th with Janine Kreinbrink. We are taking a short break for the holidays, so stay tuned for that. We do have some more time if anybody has questions. I don't know if there's anything else.
There's a few more things I can cover. I mean, especially tying, American history, Kentucky history into bourbon. So there's a lot of different explanations people have of why they picked the name bourbon. Some people say it's because when they used to take it down the river and export it, they would take it down and roll the barrels down Bourbon Street in New Orleans. Probably the most believable one, I think, is the actual the area that was Virginia that became Kentucky was called Old Bourbon. Like Lexington, that whole area was Bourbon, Virginia, basically. So between 1780 and 1820, they kind of deemed that type of whiskey bourbon. And, you know, if you like to drink bourbon, if you've talked to a lot of other people that are into it, you've probably heard a million different reasons why it's called that. But it definitely does not have to be made in Bourbon County, because a lot of people think that is the case. But yeah, it's just kind of, you know, and of course it's, you know, a French word that's really pronounced Bourbon. But we, you know, of course, there was a lot of French influence in the United States when we started expanding west, and the French purchased territory and the Spanish purchased territory. But the French specifically really had a unique influence on whiskey, which became bourbon here in America.
I don't know, is there anything that Jeff wants to talk about or specifically show at the distillery? I can unmute him.
Did we lose Jeff?
I think he's still muted.
That's I thought they were going to start that tour earlier. I feel bad for Ed because he's still stuck in the distillery.
Jeff, is there anything specifically that you want to show in the distillery?
Yeah, I'm walking out to our rick house right now. I don't know if I was unmuted or not. But
I hear you.
yeah, walking out to this is where we have our single barrel program as well, that Jason spearheads. On top of these are all of Jason and I's, if that's a proper Kentucky word. These are our coworkers.
Yep.
So
They got the
wave,
easiest
everybody.
job out of all of us.
Wave, everybody.
I'll see you tomorrow, Barrels.
Yeah, they're awful quiet tonight. They're awful quiet tonight.
That's a good
So we've
thing.
got, you know, barrels down here as well. And one thing that Jason always showcases during our
He might lose signal in that building.
Well, while we wait for him to get back, we do have a couple more questions. Tony Helton said he has a bottle of your pot still signed first batch. What does that mean? And is this your first production?
So that our pot still is the first thing, start to finish, off of the still that we use. I think you guys got a little bit of a shot of when Jeff was in the distillery, and that's actually our bear. Hate to spoil it, but we named our still Bear. Aren't we adorable? I know. But yeah, so the pot still is very special. We were just able to release it about a month ago, and that's something that we've been working on since the day the place opened in October of 2015. So that's start to finish, from that still, aging in that rick house Jeff was just in, to bottled in the same distillery. So that's something that is that's special to us. And the fact that you got a signed first batch, it's probably Jack and Josh that signed it. Hold on to it. Who knows what'll happen? Apparently, people think the pot still's all right. And that's actually the pot still itself. Now that we're on that subject, that's a traditional way of making bourbon. So it's kind of a throwback to how they used to make bourbon back in the 19th century, because a pot still, it looks like kind of a kettle. It takes longer, but you transfer more flavor over and from the grain into the final products. There's a lot more flavor. There's a lot more going on, as opposed to column still bourbon, which, if you guys ever seen those big towers with windows on them, those are columns. So those are good for cranking out alcohol, but you don't carry as much flavor over. So it's special for us because it's something not a lot of people do. And it's really done by hand and with a lot of love. But yeah, signed by Josh, that's good. And Josh was actually recently retired Boone County Sheriff's Deputy. So we have a lot of Boone County influence. So yeah, you got the autograph from the sheriff.
And how many barrels do you currently have aging?
About 1,900. Which is like a shed. So, I mean, if you look at like Jim Beam, each one of the rick houses holds about 40,000 barrels, and they have a lot of those rick houses. So, you know, we're doing everything on a really true, you know, craft, small batch, small scale. So we bottle everything. The same people that make it, that barrel it, that age it, that label it, they're the same people that bottle it. So everything's done by about 12 of us.
Mary Albert says she's confused about the proof of bourbon. She has Woodford Reserve that says it's 90.4 proof, and
Yep.
she said that she thought you said no more than 80 proof.
No, it has to be at least 80 proof. And that's just kind of a general rule of thumb for liquor and spirits in general.
We have any more questions? We still have like 15 minutes. If people have more questions or want to talk about anything else, or if Jeff wants to show something else.
I'm actually just kind of, we just opened up back in June 1st. So I was walking through our tasting room that we built. It looks like you're actually doing a tasting inside of a charred oak barrel. It's fantastic. It's about as unique as a experience you can get. We had a company out of Texas do the staves for us. Jason can touch on the Japanese art form that they use to waterproof these staves. But it's a really cool, unique experience doing a tasting. But Jason can talk about that Japanese art form.
Yeah, absolutely. So the technique that we use to make the inside of that room look like a barrel, of course, the wood facing the liquid in the barrel is all charred. You torch it, you burn it.
Yeah, that's
So
the
you can
wall
make
right
it
there.
porous. So that is actually charred wood, and it's an old Japanese waterproofing and fireproofing technique they would use in their canoes and pagodas. That's called yakisugi. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. So what they'll do is they'll torch one end of the wood and rub it down with palm oil and a couple other things. So you get the charred look, but it seals it up. So there's not dust coming off the walls. And that's an example of what actually the room looks like when there is a tasting set up. So we wanted to make everything kind of, unique and as close to home as possible. Of course, even Jack, our owner, he says, we don't have Jim Beam money, but we make it work. So that's the whole goal. Did I see there was another question there?
Yeah, Peter Neroni asked if you could describe the selection process for the corn that goes into the process.
So so there was a gentleman that we hired initially. He acts as a consultant now, but he used to be the master distiller at MGP in Indiana. So that's what used to be Seagram's. He was there for decades. Master distiller. The guy is an absolute genius when it comes to bourbon. So we actually hired him in the beginning. Now, the reason why we did, he had the best connections and he was able to get the type of corn that we want, which we use dent feed corn, which generally it's higher in sugar content. And the more sugar, the more alcohol you're going to pull out of it. So we entrusted him with that. He actually trained our distillers, and we bought the process off of him, for lack of a better explanation. So he trained all of us. The mash bill that we use is something that, he did. And then the still that we use is something that he helped us pick out. So the corn selection was all on that guy. His name's Larry Eversole. So we entrusted him with all that because he is an absolute expert. He's like the bourbon sage in Northern Kentucky.
Does anyone else have some more questions? Probably about 10 more minutes worth that we can fill up with questions.
I mean, yes, and yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, another thing, if you guys go out to Petersburg, there's still a building standing that was built with the old bricks that were from the original distillery that was torn down. It was an old 2-person jailhouse. Boone County Jail is much bigger now. Things have changed. But it's an old 2-person jailhouse out in Petersburg that was fashioned from those bricks that were repurposed.
It's really interesting. I don't know if you want to talk anything about the stuff, not necessarily from the bourbon industry, but that was mentioned in your bio maybe a little bit. And like the music industry, and maybe if that had anything to do with how you made it to the
Actually, I mean, yeah, there's kind of a loose connection. So I was in bands throughout my 20s. That's what I did. the last band that I was in, everything was going great. Band broke up because a couple people couldn't get along. So I figured I probably should find some type of stable career. So then I went to broadcasting school, ended up on the radio, and there's a lot of trade between. I mean, I worked pretty close with like Budweiser and Bud Light with a lot of different events and things and different type of bars, alcohol in general, which seems to be popular. And I was already a fan of bourbon. I mean, I've been sipping on it for a long time. And generally, if anybody else here ever played music, especially performing, you tend to have a few drinks. It helps. So when it kind of just happened, like I said, it's just fate driven. So I ended up there. I got laid off and found the Boone County Distillery, and I started out as just a tour guide, really, because that kind of crosses over with what I was already doing, and then my love for bourbon. So those kind of things just met kind of hand in hand. And yeah, I guess you could say loosely I was led into bourbon from playing music.
John Bow asked, where do you get the barrels and how are they delivered?
Perfect question. So we get our barrels from Speyside Cooperage in Jackson, Ohio. They're pretty, I mean, I think Jackson's about an hour and a half away roughly. So we try to keep everything as local as possible. And they're also a smaller cooperage. We're a smaller distillery. So we prefer to get our barrels from them. We used to get them from some of the bigger guys. I know the really, really big distilleries generally get their barrels from Kelvin and a couple other places. But we wanted to go small because we're small. And the barrels are white American oak. And we use a number 4 char. The chars range from 1 to 5. Number 4 char is actually pretty common in the industry. It means they light the inside of the barrel on fire for 55 seconds for a number 4. And they deliver them by freight. So we'll just have a 53-foot dry van, just a semi truck pull up with a whole stack of barrels in the back. And they are put on pallets. The pallets are generally all built from strictly 2x4s, and then they're shrink wrapped so that the barrels don't fall off. Now, there are some things that can happen in transportation. So if the barrel dries out too much, they'll leak when we fill them, which, you never know what's going to happen. There's a lot of variables. So if a barrel leaks when we get it, when we fill it up, it'll start coming out generally around where the barrel head is. So we'll dump the barrel back out and we'll steam the barrel. We'll take a hose off the steam line, get the wood to expand in the barrel, and then we'll hammer the rings up. And then if we have to put a wedge in the spline, which is like a scrap piece of oak wood, and around the border of where the barrel head meets in with the end of the staves, we'll do that. And then sometimes if they're too bad, a guy will come in a pickup truck from Speyside and swap us out a couple barrels. So yeah, we generally get them in a pretty big order at a time. And they come in by semi truck wrapped up. So I saw there was another question. Does 55 seconds really make a difference? It does. So if you go too far, you're going to have too much of a charred paste. It's just going to taste like burnt wood. So there is a sweet spot, and you can actually tour the place that we get our barrels from. There in Speyside Bourbon Cooperage. You can go there and you can watch them do it. It's just a bunch of guys in there with flamethrowers, really. So it's kind of fun. I wish I could use a flamethrower at work, but they won't let me, trust me, insurance purposes and, all those things. So, yeah, so that does make a difference. So 55 seconds, it has to be kind of on the dot.
So you said that the char was ranged from 1 to 5. Mm-hmm. What are the differences between those and how much does it really affect the flavor?
It does. So the number 5 really isn't, I've never heard of a distillery that uses a number 5. I think it might be there for the sake of the scale. Now, the number 4 is most common. Now, if you get down into say a 1 char, nobody really uses a 1. Probably the other one that's most common is a number 3. It's really slight, subtle differences. I mean, you wouldn't think burning a piece of wood from a difference between 40 and 55 seconds would make a difference, but it does. The number 4 is the most common, just because most distillers feel like that is the best way to go about it. You're going to get as much out of the oak as you want without getting too much, because you can't have too much oak influence to where you're drinking bourbon and it tastes like a coffee table. Not great. So there is a sweet spot. And then the number 2 and the number 1 char, it exists, but nobody really uses them. It's mainly 3 and 4. And, and that goes like subtle differences. That's what bourbon's all about. So even in aging, if you have a barrel aging 20 feet higher than another barrel, it's going to turn out different because of the way the evaporating alcohol, where it sits in the building and the difference in temperature. So you could have 2 barrels that are, 20 feet apart that taste substantially different by the time you dump that barrel and try them. That's why if anybody in here has ever gotten a single barrel bourbon, which basically indicates that it came out of 1 barrel, they'll have a sticker on the proof label that sometimes indicates what shelf it was on and which warehouse it was in, because all of those things play a difference with how those barrels turn out. And it doesn't necessarily mean better or worse, but unique characteristics between different barrels. And that's that's our small batch bourbon and small batch rye whiskey. And yeah, I mean, you can tell the difference between, where barrels sit, different wood char, different oak wood, different corn, different grain, a lot of subtle differences that make a big difference. We do, Tony. We, to anybody that wants to come by and pick one up, they're $150 a piece. And they're all of our used barrels that we dump here on site.
Yeah. We probably have time for maybe one more question. Other than that, we can, if anybody has one, other than that, we'll wrap it up. Okay.
Ooh. Another good one, 118.2 proof rye whiskey. So you gotta like rye, but you'll like it.
So it doesn't seem like anybody has a question, so then we can go ahead and wrap it up. At the museum, this weekend, we have a Winter Wonderland Bazaar and the NKY Dance Troupe. Info about that can be found on the front page of our website. Again, that is bcmuseum.org. Please check that out and come. We also have a Very Merry Holidays at BCM the week before Christmas, which has special holiday videos and on Facebook and YouTube. So go ahead and check that out the week before Christmas. Get into the holiday spirit a little bit. We also do have our holiday toy trains going on at the museum. That's always fun to come. Bring your family. Kids love it. So come and see that. So that's all we have this evening. Thank you again to all of our sponsors and supporters of the Behringer-Crawford Museum. We'd like to thank the staff, the trustees, and members of BCM. For more Northern Kentucky history throughout the week, you can check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, where you can find the latest installments of our Curators Chat with our Curator of Collections, Jason French, along with all of the other history hours we've had and other videos. So please like and subscribe to those channels. We will be taking a short break from Northern Kentucky History Hour for the holidays, like we said earlier, but we will be back on January 12th with Janine Crimebrink. You can catch up on any history hours you might have missed, or you can rewatch any that you may have especially loved on our YouTube channel. Thanks, Jason and Jeff, for being here, and thanks everyone else for coming. Have a great rest of your evening.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.